Alex's model is actually quite interesting because it mixes certain shapes. For example, what I mean is the back somewhat looks like a cross section that's rectangular with rounded edges, but then this area here kind of like bellies out, so it makes a transition to a round shape. And then actually the top, so the tip, is actually kind of like a plain nose. This one, for example, will be quite a challenge to build. So let's take a look at how I set up the scene. You see I created two different, uh, let me activate this one. I created two different canvases, and into each canvas I loaded each image. So yeah, I used the width and the height to map actually this to the canvas, and I did not actually have the scanning width and height, for example, in inches. So actually, if I go to the information window, you see that this actually has some scale functions applied, and that is because the canvas was way too small, but I need to scale it up. And how did I try to make sure that actually the scan is scaled to the correct size? Fortunately, inside the drawing, there are some helper lines. For example, a measured width of this body being equal to 3 centimeters. So all I needed to do is create my canvases and then somewhere create, for example, something that is 3 centimeter tall, and then all I needed to do was select my canvases and then basically scale them till they were perfectly matching, or the line of the canvas was matching my key point curve, and that was basically it. Okay, so that, for example, how I set up the scene. The main reason for that is basically I have a side view as well. I have a top view, and when I now create my design, I can easily switch between those different views and use those as a reference. I'm going to try to see if I can sculpt actually this part out of one surface, because I know actually the most trickiest part will later be the cap. This area is going to be quite easy. I just need to planar cap or with something else, fill it, and then trim and edge around. This one, however, is a little bit tricky. In general, those nose plane type of surfaces are quite a challenge. So, knowing that, actually, I'm going to turn on the cylinder, and I only want to use actually one cap. That's perfectly fine. And no, actually, I'm going to work with two caps. Okay. And then I'm on the grid, snap, for example, my cylinder and go to the information window. I'm going to scale this one down somewhat to what I need. And then, for example, along the y-axis, I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, move it, scale it, and then I try to somewhat meet maybe kind of like maybe something like this. I leave this one a little bit open because that's later for my nose. And then, for example, here I try to bring this one up, and I'm going along this axis, scale this a little bit. Okay, so the cross section is more rectangular, And this looks more like an ellipse, so I have to turn on my added points. And then, for example, I can go into the CV added. Let's go maybe into this view, and then I'm selecting through my model all those vertices, also of my caps, as you can see. And for example, I move them up a little bit, not too much, maybe till there. And I have to make sure I do the same with this one here, there. Do the same, the lower part. And you see it this way actually, by moving those CVs down, I'm flattening this part. And I would like to scale this one, so those two there a little bit. So let me see where my object center is. It is there, so that's actually fantastic, because now I can select maybe all those CVs. And then actually go to scale. Middle mouse button actually scales now in an orthographic view along one axis. And you see, by scaling this together, I'm flattening that a little bit. Okay, so let's take a look at the top. That's pretty close. Maybe actually the sketch I should move a little bit up there. Okay, perfect. So now the trickiest part is actually I have to figure out the correct amount of vertical subdivisions for the cylinder, so I have enough control points, for example, to extrude this shape out, but also to sculpt this shape. And that's actually going to be a little bit tricky. So I'm going to spend a few minutes to see what I need, and then I will restart this capture, because again, every model is going to be different, so very often you don't necessarily know immediately what you need. You might maybe have a rough understanding, but then you just have to make few test pieces, kind of like to study and figure out what you need. And that's what I have to do now. So after having played around with this a little bit, I know that actually to define, for example, this upper kind of like front part, the amount of points I have in terms of cross sections is somewhat sufficient. I could actually increase this one, for example, with 4 or with 5. The more points I add, the more geometry I have. So for example, I keep it at 5. And then what I can do is, for example, I'm deciding if I just want to push out, for example, the center part, which is what I'm going for. So you see everywhere here, I'm just trying to click on the midpoint of an arc. Oh yeah, here actually I have to select, of course, both. And then push those out. Do the same here. Push this one out a little bit more. Here now I notice that actually I have to select those CVs to get this curvature. I have to move them a little bit to there. So it's a lot of actually push and pull, readjusting. And for example, here maybe they should go to there. This one maybe should go to here. Okay. And let's take a look at what we have for the moment. It doesn't look too bad. So you see it's basically a simple shape, and then I pulled out some of those sides. Now let's go back to this view. This is a joint object. Sorry, I meant a grouped object. So I can ungroup it. This way, for example, my caps are individually selectable. I'm going to hide this one for the moment, simply because I want to be able to select this edge and move it out, maybe to there. And then I try to make those distances a little bit more even. Here, of course, this has to be a little bit bigger, and that's fine. Let's take a look at how this one looks. And that's pretty good actually for Sculpted. So this is actually, as you can see, a process where I'm not creating cross sections and then or profiles and then I force a surface through it. I'm actually simply creating a surface and then I'm push and pulling that surface into the shape I need. This works, for example, particularly well with cylindrical objects, which kind of like have this organic look. Okay. I think this is pretty usable. Now let's take a look at how, for example, we work on the back part. So I'm going to unhide my cap I have at the end. And let's see, for example, if maybe with a blend command, I can simply say from here, G2, to the end, G0, if you can make me a blend. And I have continuity check on, so you see actually that there are some problems, unfortunately. So this doesn't work as good as I assumed. So you see even here, tangency broke, even not even G3, but even G1. So nope, it doesn't work. Okay, that's not really a big problem because we can do something different. Let's turn this one back on, and maybe this part I move back a little bit further, so I'm trying to adjust those a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to duplicate this profile. So you see I just selected this edge, and what that actually does is it's creating a curve. So this curve, for example, now see I can move out. So let's see if maybe here we can make a blend. So the last one should not be position. Side 2 should be tangent. That works. This works. Perfect. So you see the problem was this edge to this edge making a blend. That didn't really work well. Let's go into top view, because what I wanted to see is if this line is straight, and it pretty much is. Okay. So you might ask yourself, why did I create this curve and simply didn't add more subdivisions to this body so I could sculpt everything out? And I can show you that just in a second as well. So let's go till there. And actually this part, this surface here, delete. Okay. take a look at the zebra. No directly noticeable breaks. Let's check this one more time. Okay, all works perfect. Good. What's actually good to know about this skinning stuff is the following. So let me select this one, and I'm going to select this curve here, copy and paste, and then I move this one simply up. Okay, and here let's change this one back maybe to 4, 3. I'm going drastic right now, so this is really fine. Okay, good. So here's one CV, and that has to be moved back to there. Let's say maybe this shape. Okay, perfect. This is good. And this one I move to here, copy and paste, and move to there. And for example, between those, we simply create a skinned surface. And now we think, well, you know, that's going to be very easy. We make a blend to fill it. Okay, so let's try that. This edge with this edge. J2, okay. Let's keep it for the moment. And let's take a look at how this looks besides this one breaking right now, but you can clearly see that this surface actually dips down. So if, for example, I move this surface even further to there, I mean this curve. No, actually the opposite. If I move it further away, there you can maybe better see it, how this curve runs down this direction, and then it has to blend into this line being straight. This is why, for example, this one dips down. One way, for example, to tackle that is by, for example, moving this one way up. But then you see you get another odd looking shape. Well, in this case, this one I have to adjust, so I'm trying to figure out how those curves are blended. So in case I would have created everything out of many cross sections, you can add many more cross sections to force, for example, the curve to work better. So maybe let's do that for a moment so you understand what I'm talking about. So this one, copy and paste. Let's move this one to there, paste there. Okay, so I'm going to the CV check. Let's select this one. Okay, so now I'm going to skin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there you see what's happening. And this is actually quite normal. That's, for example, when I meant to what I mean with we create curves and then we force a surface which is stiff and always wants to flatten itself through those curves. Mathematically, this is also really correct. So one could say, well, then maybe simply select this point and just move it to there, which makes it a little bit smoother. But then this dip I have, whoops, I had somewhere else and just moved. Shoot, I have to redo this one. Hold on. So this dip down, I can transfer further to the back by, for example, adjusting that midpoint. So now instead of here, it is there. So that's not really a solution. So maybe you could think, well then, copy and paste. Just put some extra lines in rail. Sorry, skin. And you see, actually, to a certain degree, that can even work. But you're making your design unnecessarily heavy. And I don't know if that's necessarily what you want. So I have now the ability, for example, to move those all to left and right. You see, but then I can still get this dip. By moving those things closer together, I can also run into the problem of maybe creating a visual crease here. So I'm just simply complicating my design unnecessarily. But essentially, it's similar to the way how I did this one here, of course. But I find it's easier than to create one part, sculpt it, and then later with a blend command, create the missing part, then trying to map out everything with loft curves. Okay, that to that. Specifically, the tip is going to be a challenge, and there you can really actually start seeing where maybe you might think, well, I could plan everything out with cross sections, might be logically, but much more work. And then having small elements and then using the skin and the surface blend command or freeform blend command will be actually better. So here in this case, oh, didn't I move this point as well? No, I guess I did not. Hold on, I have to adjust this one because here this point has actually to go, this one has to move to there. And snap, looks like I did not really adjust those points correctly. So I simply point snap them into their correct position. There. I think this one here actually moved. Yeah, it did. There. Okay, good. So this part, this cap, for example, I simply move out a little bit to there. So what I have to do now, for example, from the side view, I have to move all these points down a little bit. Maybe here. Now that's a little bit of a tricky task. I have to move those CVs down. And I have to be careful that I do not create stress inside my mesh. Okay, there. Because the main reason why I started doing this was actually I can now move this one up a notch. Yeah. I can go and select, for example, hold on, what happened here? Something is not really necessarily right. Hold on, this looks a little bit distorted in my opinion. So I'm going to create myself a new cylinder. Okay. 90 degrees. To adjust the position here a little bit. Let's move this one up to there. And then I'm simply scaling those parts back, maybe to roughly what I need. This is along the y-axis. There, yep. Okay. Okay, this actually has also to be a little bit smaller, so that's fine. And let's move this one maybe to there. And I'm using this scan actually a little bit to figure out what I need in terms of dimension. Okay, good. So Control or Apple U to ungroup it, and let's turn on my CV points. So yeah, I guess maybe everything was right, just the way how I changed my CVs distorted everything a little bit. So what I'm going to do now actually is the following. I select only those points. So one ring, and this is also another ring. And for example, along the z-axis, I push it out. And there you see, I'm actually starting to have my nose. Then I'm going and select all the points for the following ring. Okay, and let's move this one out. Okay. Then I can continue and, for example, adjust some design parts. So, for example, here, whoops, wrong key. I want this one to go to there. Maybe the same for here. And I try to visualize how this one would flow into the surface. Okay, and then at this point, actually, we are ready to create a blend. So this edge to this edge. I'm just ignoring the max span for the moment, because I also have to adjust some of those points here. So for example, here, those points are a little bit higher. Same, for example, here, they're a little bit lower. Oops, what did I do? No. So I tried to mimic a little bit the profile shape, at least of my outside ring here. Okay, this looks pretty good. So the warning with the max span was actually not really good, because that means my surface is way too complicated. But actually I fixed it, so it's back to 8. So I guess having those points adjusted was all it needed to happen. And now you see, for example, how kind of wonky this stuff looks like. So to fix this, all I need to do is simply go into my CV mode and then push and pull those points. And I have to pay attention to how, for example, this surface flows, how this surface comes up to this point, and then how it can make the transition. So this, for example, starts to look pretty good. See, this is better. Let's take a look at the lower section. Here we have to do simply the same. Maybe here also those points maybe go up just a notch. See, this also affects how this bends out. Maybe here this one goes up a little bit so I do not have this S curve. And I think we're getting there. So let's turn all the control points off. Let's delete the locators. And this looks still pretty terrible, to be honest. How do we fix this? Well, okay. I assume maybe with those points a little bit more down. See, too high doesn't do it. Too loud doesn't do it. So maybe those points are that causes the problem. So yeah, I would have to sculpt this accordingly. I could also, for example, to help this command, or the idea to blend this one, I could help this one by selecting actually all those CV points and simply moving them a little bit to the back. See, then I'm creating more space, more distance. But now then I would have to update and adjust all those points again. But again, that's that's a nice part about the construction history in Alias. You can actually do that. But for our first test, actually, I think this is already sufficient. I know that, for example, if I turn this one on and I take a look at the point layout, there's still some dips in it. That would require some more time-consuming push and pull and adjusting of all those vertices. But for the moment, I think let's leave it at that, actually. Okay, so for example, this line dips down a little bit on the bottom. So also here, for example, now we could, for example, go to the CVs and say, well, and then also here slightly push this one down. Maybe the same also here a little bit. Okay. And I think we are pretty much there. So I have to push down those points here according to the sketch. This one hangs down a little bit more. Then also here. There. So I think then you're close. Okay, perfect. So let's take a look at how, for example, we finish this area, the end. That's actually going to be quite easy and quite comfortable. There are multiple ways how to do that. So I'm going to create myself, in this case, actually a flat plane, because essentially this is still a rectangular cross section. This plane I rotate along the y-axis 90 degrees, so 0, 90, 0. And then I have to scale this part. Oh, where did it go to? Okay, information window. Yeah, not really where I want it to be. There. Let's move this one up. There, did I? Okay, and then scale this one a little bit more. Ooh, wrong one. Don't scale that part. Okay, so the main reason behind this task was actually if you create a flat sheet, you see it's actually kind of like a flat sheet of paper, and it has two subdivisions, or isoprams, along the surface, if you want to call it that way. And this can actually be really helpful for us when we try, for example, to create a nice surface that at the center domes out a little bit. So I made this one on purpose a little bit bigger, and then I move this one into my surface. Let's turn this one off. Then I go into CV. I'm only selecting those points, and then I slightly dome this one out. Take a look at how the surface looks like there, maybe like this. Okay, because what I can do now is first save. I actually can go ahead and say, for example, intersect, let's go this way, spacebar, and then trim, keep, and here, keep. Now there you see I have an end that's slightly domed. And then I could go ahead and use the surface fillet tool, I think, and then say U and U. Now I have to figure out the radius. I think this is way too big. And now max span means we have way too many spans. So you see this is over 100. So this is kinda not really very good. I don't really think we can, for example, fix this a lot by adjusting those values by hand. Probably will maintain having this problem. Yeah, that's simply because I have a really nice and rounded part. It's a one shell, which is not really ideal. That's another of the problems. So, but for the moment, let's actually accept the span problem we have. Oh, chord doesn't work. It started, and simply go with this one. Again, what we're doing right now is simply a concept model. And let's take a look at how this one looks this way. And it's actually quite pleasing. There. Okay. Maybe we can play with that fillet a little bit. So I have a form factor here. And for example, let's try to look at what happens if we lower this one. or push this one out. There we see, for example, how it changes the fillet a little bit. So at this point, actually, I would leave it actually there. One could also actually create a surface in the center, dome it, cut it, and then actually by hand create a surface blend. Because essentially what the surface fillet did was it calculated where it has to trim those two surfaces and then how to create the blend surface. And this command actually with the geometry I have at the beginning simply creates a lot of, well, a math heavy or span heavy surface, which is why I got all those span problems. So technically speaking, I would have to break this one up into multiple smaller surfaces, so the math is simply easier. But because I don't have that right now, I get those problems or those warnings. But again, when we send this one to Fusion and print it, actually it will work. And for our first sculpting part, I think this is also acceptable. Okay, so that was, for example, a way how you could create something organic like this one. Still needs a little bit of adjustment. So for example, now I see here this part is not really very good looking. So this whole surface, maybe we can move a little bit and let's see. Oh, there we get another span annoyance. So maybe I simply later move those CVs instead of moving everything. So it's a little bit of sculpting and fine-tuning. Okay, again, what happens if we only do it with that point? Maybe this actually can be okay. Yeah, and again, because those two cross sections are very close to each other, here, for example, it continues this flat look and then it bends over. So this is really perfectly normal. If I want to have a nicer, smoother transition, I could simply take this cross section, move it further back, so I give the fillet command more space to skin that stuff in. And that's just now subject to fine-tune that. At this stage, for example, we can now try to see how we could rebuild this one. And this is actually very often a common process. You give a test drive to a design, try to see how you could build it, try to figure it out. At certain points you will find some problems and maybe some solutions, and then you know actually how to basically solve this puzzle. Because for example, this one is still kind of problematic and actually very dense, so it's hard to adjust. So I think understanding that how we sculpted this tip, we can actually build this one by hand out of this surface. But for that, we have to make this surface a little bit longer. So for example, I see this one, if I turn on the CVs, we see, for example, how many control points we have. So what I'm going to do now is actually the following. I'm selecting this one, copy and paste, for example, put it onto this layer, and hold on 1 second, all those actually should be on this layer, and then I can make a duplicate of that curve there. This should be a reference now. And this curve, for example, I copy and paste. multiple times. And for the moments, actually, never mind, that was kind of silly. All I wanted to do is just copy and paste it, of course, till there. Move it to something like here. And then, for example, create a new skin surface out of this one and this one. Perfect. Then those curves I can select and simply delete because I have a new tunnel. Now this tunnel, you see, has no sections in between. So that's now where I come in with my preview model. So let's make this one pickable. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then for the tip 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so maybe a degree 3 here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. As you can see, we go, for example, degree 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. No, so degree 8. It's not really super ideal geometry, but again, for a quick resculpt, this is actually sufficient. Okay, accept. So now what we have to do is actually, exactly, we have to reposition those. And you see this is actually not very difficult because we have our master below, so I can use those actually simply as a sketch part. Here I have to use this one and move it over. There. There. And then here, for example, select all those, move it to there. Perfect. So, and then all I need to do is just redo the same for this part. And move. There. And I can even do that in 3D. So you see, I'm already pretty close to the original design. And then here comes the tricky part now. So I need to skin those together, or not skin, scale them together. So I'm going to create myself, geez, what I'm doing. Oh, wrong key combination. Control Alt, create myself a line, because then with this line I could set pivot point, for example, there, but actually I do that for this object there, because now if this one I can delete, of course, if I select all those CVs, I can actually use the scale tool towards that control point. Okay, so next step, I do that with the next set of points. But first, actually, I'm going to scale from a side view. I'm pressing the middle mouse button. You see I'm scaling orthographically from a side to that point. And this actually, for example, makes them all kind of like lined up with each other. Once that is achieved, then I can simply also scale them. Okay, so here, those points by hand for the moment, I simply move down. Let's do the same here. Move move them up. CVs. I'm not selecting those in the center because now I continue scaling this, as you can see, slightly more into a circle. And then actually let's scale this one down till it closes. So this is not really closed. It's more, I mean, it's still an open surface, but actually the points lined up so far so that you get the impression that this actually is closed. So again, this is actually quite similar to polygonal modeling, and you see already the transitions are actually pretty well. They're not too bad. Okay, I'm going to pause you for a second because I have to do a little bit more push and pull to get everything back to the scan. So here I'm back. I'm pretty close to have most of the scan features recreated. See, I've just to make a few adjustments here and there till I get to the shape he had. And also keep in mind what I mentioned before. For a full model, it's one thing. Trying to rebuild that out of a NURB surface is something different. So sometimes you have to make sacrifices to certain shapes or details. But I think this one actually got pretty close. So the transitions of my tip are actually really nice for a sculpted part, and the mesh is kind of heavy. But again, for the prototyping, well, this is probably okay, and specifically for like doing a presentation with that design. But in general, most of the stuff is really well captured. And also sometimes you make a sketch, that's just one thing, and sometimes you want to adjust kind of like then the design of your sketch afterwards, because you start seeing that, well, maybe there should be some changes to it. So for example, here right now, I'm also moving this one down just a little bit more here. Nope. There. This one up. Okay. So I think at this point I might actually leave it there. Here, those points maybe move a little bit. There. There. Okay, we're getting close to wrap this one up. See, still have to adjust some of those CVs. Let's check the site. Everything is still good. Okay, so in this case now, let's see if I pull this whole thing and move it actually to the back. You see the, and now this comes down to what you want. You see actually that there's a really slight slope. Now, do you want this slope because maybe it might be nice and natural, or do you want to have a perfectly straight line? If, for example, this slight slope and here this is a little bit more flattish, not really 100% flat, then this is actually okay. So this is good. If, for example, you want something that is really flat, then we would have to patch in, kind of like before, make another segment, make a blend, and then touch it up. Pretty much the same process. But you see actually that specifically for the tip part, this is really very nice and smooth. It's very easy to manipulate and work with. The only thing maybe I don't necessarily really like is how here my sketch is different than my computer model. So unfortunately, I guess what I have to do here is simply this. I might have to rearrange my CVs a little bit. Go one more to there. Maybe here push this one over. and push this one over. You see I'm getting closer actually to the way how it looked, and then unfortunately I have to push all those a little bit back, push this one back out. But that's a nice part about cage modeling. You can push and pull those points. You don't have to deal with transitions because the surface itself, that's skinned inside, is always nice and smooth. One of the advantages of a NURBS surface. And there we see pretty much where we were before. Okay, now knowing this, I should have had another one here, so I could maybe straighten this one a little bit, but I think this is pretty fantastic for how I have it. And yeah, so the last step to do is either the same way how I did this one. I could close this one and sculpt it by hand. Or for example, with the technique I showed before, I could either bend something in. I could also, for example, use the planar surface if I want to have a flat cap. Here, simply make it flat. And then let's go to the surface fillet. And maybe 2. Let's check if this works. Yeah, so there it is. Of course, again, it's a pretty heavy mesh, but for our purpose, this is sufficient. Perfect. That's it.